Welcome to the Scholar 30 to 80 Skills Guide. In this guide we will cover all of your skills as you train to eat your fairy for DPS better than the rest of them, but also hopefully kill your enemies along the way. Watch as you go from this to this. This guide is framed in the mindset of players completely new to Final Fantasy XIV or the MMO genre in general. In that same vein, this will merely be an overview of the actions and how to use them. We will, however, be going in depth on all of your skills and some high skill level uses for each. You may never do high-end content, but the same mentality for a skill can be used at lower levels. The goal is to drop players in on the ground level so they can make strides to improve themselves. All tooltips will be shown at the level cap for each section. Level 50 for A Realm Reborn, level 60 for Heavensward, 70 for Stormblood, and then finally at level 80 for Shadowbringers. I also recommend all players add Sprint and Limit Break to their hotbars, both found in the General tab of your Actions menu. And as for how my hotbars build, it'll make sense at 80. Just put skills on your hotbars in a way you feel comfortable using as you're leveling. Everyone has their own way of doing things. With that all out of the way, let's begin. Before I begin, I'm going to stress that not every instance will apply to my advice. In an ideal world, players never make mistakes, but we all know that will never happen. Nobody is perfect, and you too will make plenty of mistakes. I'm going to focus on the ideal scenarios, but also try to account for when things go wrong. Sometimes, you have to account for the worst situations possible. To put it another way, healers have to adjust if they want everyone to live. Also note that this is not a healing basics guide. This is going to focus in on scholar skills specifically, and only slightly mention general healer tactics. At level 30, you will be able to undertake your first job quest to obtain a soul stone. You must also complete all class quests from your guild. The other requirement is the level 20 main story quest, Self-Management. This takes place soon after joining a grand company. This won't be an issue on normal servers, but any server with the preferred status and the road to 70 buff will likely lead new players to be 30 long before this story threshold is met. If you were looking for the Arcanist level 1 to 30 guide, I have covered that already in the Summoner guide, linked in the description. And if it wasn't obvious from Arcanist, you should do your job quests to obtain skills. I will note on screen anytime a skill comes from a job quest. Scholar also comes with a set of role actions. Level 8 Repose, level 10 Esuna, level 18 Swiftcast, and level 24 Lucid Dreaming. I will not be going deep into detail on role action usage, but all of these are important skills to keep around. Check the healer role actions video in the description if you need an overview. I recommend it, since they're closely tied with being an effective healer. Finally, we get onto our starting kit as a scholar. Level 1 Ruin, and level 2 Bio. These two skills work the same as on Arcanist. However, Ruin has received a potency loss to now be only 160 potency. It also costs double to use, at 400 mana. Our normal attack and singular dot. Put the dot on your enemies, then spam Ruin until the dots fall off, or your enemies die. Healers can put out a lot of DPS, so be sure to put out damage where you can. However, you don't have Bio because level 26, Corruption Mastery, and Bio II. Corruption Mastery auto-upgrades Bio into Bio II, like with Summoner. Scholar, however, needs 200 less MP to cast, for only a cost of 400. This is also 10 potency stronger, for a total of 400 potency dot over 30 seconds. Level 4, Physick. This is our basic heal. Costs 400 mana and cures 400 potency worth of healing. Even starting at level 30, this is going to heal a big chunk of health. You won't need to use this more than 4 times in a row to heal the full HP of a tank that is under attack. So try not to spam this too much. Scratch damage doesn't need healing at low levels, and often at high levels too. Try and measure the power of your heals as you use them, and heal based on percentages. I typically only actively heal a tank when they drop to around 50%. You can start much higher, at say 80%, and slowly work your way down. But constantly spamming Physick helps nobody, especially when you have DPS spells you can be using. Level 4, Summon Eos, and Summon Selene. Both of these do the exact same thing. They're just color swaps. If you think one of them looks ugly and don't like it, feel free to keep it off your bar. I will be using only Eos, just because. Either way, it costs 200 mana to summon them, and they come with all the same pet commands as Arcanist. However, Scholar will ideally only care about leaving the fairy on guard, while using Stay, Heal, and Place. In guard, she will automatically heal anyone who needs it, which usually is the tank. Place and Stay matter often, because your fairy will sometimes be slow to heal if you are on the move. During trash pulls, this is often not an issue, as movement is minimal once the tank has pulled all the enemies they intend to pull. But bosses, you will want to place the fairy down in the middle of the arena, and leave her there. If you intend to run to the middle of the arena first, Stay works too. After the boss dies, you will use Heal to have her follow you again. Otherwise, when you get too far away, she will automatically leave and need to be resummoned. However, this only really ever applies to dungeons and early trials due to their small-sized arenas. Raids and higher level trials in the expansions can have gigantic arenas, especially 24-mans. People will be moving around or needing to group up based on which alliance you are in. Proper placement, or just letting her follow you, will be a case-by-case basis. All of this comes down to the actual use of the fairy. She has the ability Embrace, a 150 potency cure on a 3-second cooldown. She will use this on her own on any targets that require healing. This basically means she is a permanent regen. Content up to level 30 can be solo healed by your fairy, assuming nothing goes wrong, and everyone is geared. Beyond the Dungeon Hawk Manor though, she starts to need backup no matter how geared everyone is. Don't get lazy though, keep an eye out for your party no matter what level content you're doing. This all seems like too much info for too simple a pet, but she can do much more as we continue on. Level 12, Resurrection. This is the exact same raise as Summoner. 8-second cast time, 2400 mana cost. This brings back a fallen player back to life with a 25% penalty to all offensive stats for 100 seconds. This can stack twice. If an ally dies, raise them as soon as possible. Make sure nobody else is in danger of dying before you start casting, since you are stuck for a long time. If it's the tank who died, it is especially important to get them up. You and your allies can't take too many hits from enemies, especially compared to tanks. The massive mana cost ensures you can't be constantly raising people, so you are incentivized to be sure people stay alive. Just remember, you can't save everyone. People will die no matter how good you are. Be prepared to get a lot of use out of this. A lot of things are out of your control and will force you to heal a lot more. Just be sure to heal your ally after they are revived so they don't die again. Also know that Resurrection pairs well with Swift Cast. Level 20, Whispering Dawn. This is the first fairy ability we get. On a 60-second cooldown, your fairy will cast Whispering Dawn with a range of 15 yalms from their position, which is where that discussion comes into play. A poorly placed fairy can mean that nobody even gets this buff. Whispering Dawn itself is a regen for 120 potency for 21 seconds. This is a total of 840 potency of healing for every ally hit. Your fairy will pause its Embrace casting while playing the Whispering Dawn animation, but then return to her auto heals afterwards. You might think that this is for AoE healing only. It is a very strong AoE heal, good for topping off your team without spending a GCD heal yourself. However, you can still use this for single target healing. It is slightly lower potency than Embrace, but it can be running at the same time as your fairy spams Embrace. You'll lose maybe one Embrace during the animation to essentially turn her Embrace casts into 270 potency instead. It more than makes up for the singular lost cast. This makes healing the tank in trash pools a lot easier to do overall. In most boss fights, however, you won't want to use it like that. Some bosses don't have a lot of AoE damage, so you will want to use it just for the tank, but many other bosses, especially at the late levels, there will be a lot of AoE damage, and Whispering Dawn will take care of a lot of it, especially with the short cooldown. Level 20, Maim and Mend. This just increases your damage and healing by 10%. You won't even notice the difference. Level 30, Adloquium. This is basically going to replace Physick. Costing a much higher 1000 mana, it cures 300 potency, 100 less than Physick. However, this actually ends up being 675 potency when adjusted for the additional effect. Galvanize is a shield for 125% of the heal Adlo hits for, so 375 potency on its own. But even further is Catalyze. A critical hit will grant a second shield, the Catalyze, for an additional 375 potency shield. So not only does a crit mean the heal and shield are stronger, Catalyze functionally doubles the strength of the shield. Both shields have a 30-second duration, so there's plenty of time for enemies to spend their damage chipping away at those instead of the tank's health. The only downsides I can think of are, ironically, the shields themselves. If you get into a party with a second scholar, or an astrologian who refuses to use their regen aspect, your shields can't both be applied to allies. The stronger shield will immediately overwrite the weaker one. This also includes in dungeons where you are the only healer. Your shields can only be overwritten by a stronger shield. Because of this, if the tank takes a huge amount of damage, say because of a tank buster or standing in AoEs, but the enemies have low DPS, you can't realistically spam Adlo without wasting a huge amount of MP. So you'd want to alternate Adlo and Physick, depending on how low enemy DPS is. This is also assuming Whispering Dawn is on cooldown. If enemy DPS is that low, Whispering Dawn would fill the gap. Trash pools often allow for this kind of alternating pretty well though. Adlo, Physick, Adlo. Assuming the first Adlo did not crit, by the time you finish the second Adlo cast, the shield will have been completely depleted. For other uses, we have pre-pool. Because MP regen outside of pool is so high, throwing Adlo on the tank before you even reach the enemies puts you way ahead in healing for no MP deficit. A much more proactive use is specifically to negate the tank busters and not just recover afterwards. This requires a higher level of study when doing content, but if you learn when and where a tank buster is, you can preemptively shield the tank to minimize the damage they receive, especially if the shield crits. One final note is topping off allies who took extra damage enough to need a dedicated heal. Assuming you need to spend specifically a GCD on them, the question becomes whether you should Physick or Adlo. It depends. If you aren't hurting for MP, you could Adlo them even if they won't get hurt again, but the shield is there as a backup in case they do take more damage by accident. But if your MP is lower, you could just Physick them and hope they won't stand in the bad more. This is just the level of depth you can get into for more than one of your skills. Adlo is just one of the best examples of how in-depth you can be. I can't go over every single possible use, and I'm liable to miss some even if I tried. Just keep an eye out for all the ways you can apply your skill set as we gain more skills. Level 35, Succor. This is our global AoE heal. For a massive 1300 mana, this cures a paltry 180 potency, but also applies a 225 potency shield for 30 seconds. And just like Adlo, the Galvanize effect will not stack with other shields of similar type. If the full shield is spent, it is essentially 405 potency of healing. This is best used as a preventative skill. Where possible, use this to prevent raid-wide damage rather than heal afterwards. The shield is far more valuable than the cure potency. Better to heal 0, but shield for the full 225 potency, rather than only heal 180 potency, and giving a shield that doesn't get used at all. Ideally, get use out of both the heal and the shield, but that's not always possible to do, and obviously, getting use out of neither is just pointless. This is just one more reason to learn bosses as best you can. Level 38, Ruin II. This is awkward for a few reasons. For 400 mana, the same cost as Ruin 1, this does 150 potency of damage, 10 less than Ruin 1. It is also instant cast, meaning you can move and fight at the same time, which is why it is a separate button and not the same button like the bio upgrade. 10 potency lost is still 10 potency lost, so use Ruin 1 where you can, if just for getting used to it because it's going to get upgrades later. Until those upgrades though, using Ruin 2 is barely punished. Basically, not punished at all. Use this anytime you are forced to move around for some free damage. You can't cast while moving, but you can use Ruin 2 while moving. Level 40, Maim and Mend 2. Like the first, but this one increases your power by 30%. You might actually notice this one, but likely not. Level 40, Fey Illumination. This is our second fairy skill. Using this orders her to use Fey Illumination on a 120 second cooldown. Like Whispering Dawn, this has a 15 yalm radius, and for 20 seconds all allies affected will take 5% less magic damage, which covers the vast majority of raid-wide attacks. Also, healing spell potency is increased by 10%. Abilities receive no buff. This is not healing received though. This is a buff to the user that makes them heal more. So you will heal more, but your allies won't receive more healing if you yourself don't get the buff. In 8-man content, this will also buff your co-healer's healing power if they receive the buff. So the heavier the enemy damage, the more this helps, especially because of that 5% raid-wide damage. Everyone is taking just a little bit less, and both of you can heal just a bit more, and that comes out to making things a lot easier. Like other skills, ideally you want to make use of both effects at once. Use Fey Illumination right before some major damage spike for the party to reduce it even just slightly. Then have the healing buff to heal it away even more effectively. Really? As long as you don't use Fey Illumination 10 seconds too early, you'll have plenty of time to make use of both effects. You do need to use it ahead of time though, since there's about 3 seconds from button press to the action going out. Possibly even longer, depending on if she gets animation locked into an embrace. Or maybe it's a situation where you need to use Whispering Dawn too, which she needs to finish that animation before she can use Fey Illumination. And for one more quick bit of emphasis, fairy placement is even more important now because of this additional skill. At level 44, we have the roll action, Surecast. Level 45, Aetherflow. This is where our Aetherflow from Arcanist disappeared to. Our Aetherflow gauge has returned, and now has 3 diamonds instead of 2. It also does not gain charges from Energy Drain. This skill itself gives us 3 charges, can only be used in combat. We can use it once every 60 seconds to fill our gauge to max and regenerate 1000 MP. We start with 2 skills that can make use of these charges. Level 45, Energy Drain. This looks familiar too, doesn't it? On a 3-second recast and costing an Aetherflow, this does 150 potency of damage to the enemy and regenerates 500 MP. Roughly, a third of the damage you do will be given back to you as healed HP. This really isn't a lot of healing though. This is both some nice extra damage and a good chunk of extra MP. 1500 more MP is a lot of regeneration on top of the guaranteed 1000. However, this will generally be your Aetherflow dump and not your main usage. There are a lot better options to use Aetherflow on, especially if you aren't hurting for mana. This is because of what our other Aetherflow skills actually are. Level 45, Lustrate. In exchange for an additional Aetherflow stack charge, and on a 1-second recast, basically a formality, this heals the target for 600 potency. This is still not as strong as an Adlo, but it is a very strong heal. Instead of doing Adlo, Physick, Adlo, just Adlo into Lustrate to top off the tank. Or instead of wasting a GCD on an ally, just throw a Lustrate on them, and that's all you need. But of course, Aetherflow is not infinite. You're going to gain yet more options to spend Aetherflow on, and have less to just casually throw around like that. Don't get used to it, but be sure to spend your stacks no matter what. Leaving the Aetherflow skill off cooldown is a waste. There are fringe high-level cases to hold on to Aetherflow, but in general you want to use it immediately after it comes off cooldown. So use the stacks you have, be it to heal up the tank with Lustrate, or extra energy drains for mana and DPS, and get that cooldown running again. If nothing else, do it to build up the muscle memory. Level 46, Art of War. This is just getting ridiculous. In an AoE 5 yalms around you, this is an instant cast that does 150 potency to all enemies hit for 600 mana. This is better than either Ruin on as few as just 2 targets for very little extra mana. It is also better than Bio II on 3 or more enemies. This gets a little more balanced as you level up, but for now, this is basically your best attack for a few levels. Use Art of War just about any time there are multiple enemies, unless something really bad happens that got you low on mana due to needing to spam heals. The extra 200 mana cost is so inconsequential that you won't even notice it otherwise. Slap that ground like you mean it! At level 48 is our final role action, Rescue. Level 50, Sacred Soil. This is our third Aetherflow spender, but this one has a 30-second recast, so you can only use it twice at most for every Aetherflow stack. Sacred Soil allows you to put down a shield bubble for 15 seconds. You must manually position the bubble with the mouse and a click, or aiming the camera and pressing X on controller. All players who remain within the bubble will receive 10% less damage. The bigger issue with this skill is keeping people inside of the bubble. This basically entirely is the reason I use Rescue. to force people into the bubble I place down. This reduces the amount of healing you have to do if people actually stand in it. This might seem like a party effect only, just like Whispering Dawn, but let's consider trash pulls and tank busters again. A heavy tank buster reduced by 10% can be a lot. Trash pulls, especially when the tank is pulling multiple groups at once, can be huge gains in terms of how much or how little you have to heal the tank for the duration of the bubble. The tank buster use is probably the worst of the uses, but often using it for a tank buster at least blocks a few auto attacks from the boss too. Plus, tank busters can often be closely paired with raid-wide AoEs. Lustrate is still overall the better option against a tank buster, but if a tank is squishy enough, a Sacred Soil might help keep their paper armor from crumbling under the pressure. Normally with these videos I go over rotational openers. However, you can clearly see that we don't have many DPS tools as a healer. One single target spell with an instant cast version, 1 dot, and 1 AoE. The only other thing we have is Aetherflow for Energy Drain, which we could have been using on heals too. Because of this, I will only be going over 1 opener now, and 1 much later due to 2 extra skills because there's so little to Scholar openers. Pre-pull Ruin 1 as the tank runs up to pull the boss if possible, then do the following: Bio II, Aetherflow, Energy Drain, Ruin 1, Ruin 2, Energy Drain, Ruin 1, Ruin 2, Energy Drain, then spam Ruin, and repeat when possible. Now, obviously if you are learning a fight, you might be better off holding the energy drains for heals. Ultimately, you do need to prioritize keeping everyone alive, even if you can be putting out higher DPS as a healer. Your first set of Aetherflow in a fight can typically be safely spent on DPS, but always be ready to adjust. A lot can happen in a fight, and DPS isn't always possible. Also, that pre-pull Ruin 1 is only because you can get off a hit immediately as the tank begins when timed right. I often skip this because tanks tend not to use pull timers. The most I can get off is a pre-pull Adlo before the boss has become active. Be flexible, and only dump your Aetherflow like this in an opener once you're confident in your abilities. You have plenty of time to practice as you progress the story, as we head into Heaven's Word. Level 52, Indomitability. This is an AoE healing Aetherflow spender. It has a 30-second cooldown and heals for 400 potency. Recall that Succor is only 405 potency total. We're limited to 2 uses max per Aetherflow due to the 30-second recast, but it isn't often you will need additional healing beyond this. It's a nice chunk of direct healing, and if nothing else, you can delay a Succor to top off the party completely until right before a raid-wide AoE. This way, you don't have to waste any healing power or mana. Either way, this is more efficient than a Succor typically. It just means you're going to be a lot more strict with your Aetherflow stacks with so many different options. Level 54, Broil Mastery, and Broil. Broil Mastery upgrades Ruin, Ruin II, and Art of War. Ruin II and Art of War simply get a 10 potency boost to 160 potency. Ruin gets a fancy upgrade to Broil. This is 240 potency, which actually makes it a significant power boost over Ruin II finally. This is why I recommended not getting used to spamming Ruin II, because Broil is a lot stronger of an option. Level 56, Deployment Tactics. On a 120-second cooldown, this takes the exact same galvanized buff on a targeted ally and copies it to all allies within a 10 yalm radius. This includes both the power of the shield and the timer on it. The catalyze from a critical hit does not spread. The range on this is a bit more limited than your other AoEs, so you may want to use yourself as the initial target, allowing you to aim a little bit. If you're going to do a sucker only for a shield, stop and do deployment tactics instead. Adlow yourself, position yourself, and deploy. It costs less mana and shields far more damage. Just be sure it's a heavy enough AoE to be worth the deployment. Some bosses have very light damaging AoEs, but also AoEs that do a lot more damage. As long as everyone is where they should be, the much higher power of this option over the power of Succor is just too good. Just keep in mind I said that if you're only using Succor for the shield. If you're actually using both the heal and the shield of Succor, and this isn't a high level raid where raid wides do entire health bars worth of damage, the extra mana cost of Succor isn't too much more to be worried about. You should have 300 mana to spare if things aren't going completely terribly. Level 58, Emergency Tactics. On a 15-second recast and lasting for 15 seconds, your next Adlow or Succor will no longer give a shield. Whatever shields would have been placed on the ally will be directly converted into HP. This makes Succor and Adlow much more reasonable in terms of being used for burst healing. In earlier levels, I recommended alternating Adlow and Physick for when a tank needed a ton of healing. Now you can emergency tactics Adlow, Adlow. The first will be a 675 potency heal, 1050 potency if it crits. The second will be a 300 potency heal with a 375 potency shield, 750 potency shield if it crits. Emergency Tactics also solves half the problem I kept going over with Succor, wasting the shield or the heal itself. If all you need is the heal, and you don't have any Aetherflow, you can Emergency Tactics a Succor for 405 potency heal to all allies in range. Like we already went over, this is roughly the same potency as an Indom cast. It's rare enough to need that much AoE healing, but the option is there if you need it. The cooldown of this is so short that it's nearly always an option. You should still rely on your better options first, but things happen, and this is quite literally, as the name suggests, an emergency tactic. Level 60, Dissipation. On a 3-minute cooldown, you eat your fairy to gain her power. She will leave the field for 30 seconds, in exchange for giving you a full stack of Aetherflow and a 20% healing potency buff. She returns to the field immediately after the buff ends. Keep in mind that, while Embrace is nice, it's only 150 potency. Let's convert this all into pure potency comparisons. Dissipation lasts for 30 seconds, which is enough time for 10 uses of Embrace. That is a total of 1500 potency. Meanwhile, Lustrate is 600 potency, and Dissipation gives you 3 Aetherflow for 1800 potency. For pure healing power, the Aetherflow alone more than makes up for the loss of your fairy. You can even use Whispering Dawn before you send her away, so it's as if she's only gone for 9 seconds, and got a tiny little bit of power loss for the rest of the time. This isn't even accounting for Indom or Sacred Soil usages, which if we assume the full 400 potency is healed for everyone, an Indom is 1600 potency alone in a 4-man party, and 3200 potency for an 8-man. Again, way more powerful than your fairy. Let's talk more specifically about that healing buff. The exact wording matters quite a bit. Just like Fey Illumination, healing magic potency is increased by 20%. This means spells. Abilities are not healing magic, they are healing abilities. This is a slight semantic difference that means Lustrate and Indomitability are still 600 and 400 potency respectively, where Physick is now 480 potency. Don't dissipate expecting your Aetherflow skills to be improved. However, as I already showed, Aetherflow stacks alone are worth dissipating your fairy for, and as already discussed in previous skills, sometimes you are forced to use GCD healing. If nothing else, this can be combined into even stronger deployment tactics, or emergency tactics. You might get functionally less use out of the magic boost, but you will still get some use out of it. If nothing else, swallow that fairy whole for that sweet, sweet energy drain damage. Overall, Heaven's Word is where Scholar really comes into its own. The vast number of options each of your skills offers makes Scholar extremely flexible in the right hands. There's a lot of permutations, but in general, you need not memorize them all. It will just naturally happen as you play, and keep up your balance between damage and healing. This idea is furthered with Stormblood. Level 62, Excogitation. This is the greatest single Aetherflow skill, hands down. It has a 45-second cooldown, so you get roughly 1.5 Excogs per Aetherflow recast. Your target is given a buff that lasts for 45 seconds. When the timer ends, or when the player falls below 50% health, 800 potency of healing is instantly applied. The fire and forget nature of it makes it extremely useful in so many situations. For trash pulls, you could put Excog on the tank as soon as they start pulling, and just not care about healing them until after Excog has been spent. For bosses, this can be your go-to for tank busters. Assuming the tank has enough HP to survive the buster, you can even skip the Adlo and just Excog them. The moment the tank buster hits, the heal will apply, and you may not even realize the tank got hurt. I've personally more than once been confused in Raid that a tank buster that normally does 100,000 damage did only like 20,000. Excog popped before I could even realize it. Excog should almost always only ever go on the tank. The only exception I can possibly come up with is having just revived a non-tank ally. You revive with such low health, Excog will automatically trigger. You can't leave a revived player at low health, or the next gust of wind will kill them off, and Excog is a quick solution, if albeit not too great of one. Level 64, Broil Mastery II, and Broil II. Broil has been automatically upgraded to Broil II. It now does 260 potency. Ruin II also receives a potency boost again. Now it does 180 potency. Level 66, Chain Stratagem. On a 120-second cooldown, the target of your choosing will take 10% more critical hits. This is the final DPS skill we will need for an opener. This is basically worthless outside of bosses. If you're more than 2 minutes away from the boss, you might as well use it anyway though. If a boss is soon, however, save it. No matter what, this can only affect one target, and as such, is not very effective in trash pools. By this point, everyone should be using AoE, so at best you are getting 10% more crits on one of maybe a dozen enemies at once. On bosses, use this on cooldown. Everyone is focused on just a single enemy, so it will be the most effective. Timing this outside of a static environment is typically unreliable, so just use it as directed in the opener I show off, and then off cooldown as long as the boss remains alive. Often, players will have their own burst phases ready for bosses too, so that's another reason to save it for your opener on bosses. The only exception I can think of is the very rare times that a single enemy has the HP of around 5 enemies, almost like a sort of mini-boss. But let's show off that opener now. As before, this doesn't really ever change due to your future DPS changes, being just improved versions of these skills. Pre-pull Broil if you can while the tank is running up to the boss. Then Bio II, Aetherflow, Energy Drain, Broil, Ruin II, Swift Cast, Chain Stratagem, Broil, Energy Drain, Broil, 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 and Broil, Bio II, then Broil spam forever until your dot needs to be re-put back onto the boss. The only two bits that need to be noted are the Chain Stratagem section and the second Bio II. We use chains specifically in this double weave to time with DPS openers. The Swift Cast is just to allow for the Broil to be instant cast, so we can weave in the Energy Drain in after. The second Bio II is at the end of our Chain Stratagem. Dots, snapshot buffs tied to them, so the entire duration of the dot will have the effects of Chain, and any other party buffs attached. We also have one Energy Drain left over to use as we wish. If you intend to use it as an Energy Drain, use it before the Chain window ends. Now, there is an opener that specifically uses Dissipation for more Energy Drains. This Dissipation is in a double weave with the third Energy Drain, so as not to waste any stacks of Aetherflow. Only aim to do that opener if you are comfortable with using Dissipation for DPS. Some fights would be better off using Dissipation specifically for extra heals. I won't be going over it just because it's nowhere near as newbie friendly as this one. You still have to heal after all. Openers are usually safe to go crazy with the DPS, but not every fight is the same, and every party is different. The option is there though. Level 70, Aetherpact. To start, this skill comes with a new gauge. To increase it, you simply have to use Aetherflow skills while your fairy is active and you are in combat. This means if you use the Aetherflow stacks from a Dissipation before she returns, which you typically will want to be doing, it won't give you any gauge. All of our Aetherflow skills give 10 points without exception. This is where Aetherpact itself comes in. Choosing an ally as a target, where no target to default to yourself, your fairy will target them with a concentrated beam of healing. This stops her auto-embracing to focus this ally. This beam is an increased power embrace essentially, as it is a heal over time, or hot. Every 3 seconds a tick of the beam will apply, healing your chosen ally for 400 potency. Each tick costs 10 gauge, so in total you can hold 10 ticks of Aetherpact in your full gauge. Aetherpact itself will become Dissolve Union for the duration of the tether. Using this will cancel the union and return your fairy to normal actions. Using either Whispering Dawn or Fey Illumination will immediately cancel Aetherpact. She cannot do 2 actions at once, and both of these take priority. So if you need one of her abilities to be used, make sure it is before Aetherpact, or be ready for Aetherpact to end upon using. As for Aetherpact itself, this is basically just a stronger hot, like I said. It does a much better job of handling boss auto attacks than her basic heal, but I prefer to use it mostly in trash pools I don't dissipate for if it's a dungeon. The extra healing is much nicer in trash than for dungeon bosses, but 400 potency is an entire Physick every 3 seconds. That's almost triple the strength of Embrace. Just be wary of the tether length. 15 yalms is a huge distance, but she will not follow the ally she is tethered to. She will remain in place, trying to apply the tether until the ally gets back in range. You will have to dissolve union just to make her move. On the plus side, this will not spend gauge unless she is succeeding to heal, so you're not losing 10 gauge over and over for 0 healing. The skill set we got here is very useful if situational. Just remember, you can combine different abilities together. You don't have to always use one at a time. Keep that in mind as we get into Shadowbringers. Before I go further, take note that scaling of heals has decreased dramatically above level 70. You'll see little to no change level to level outside of a bigger toolkit. You'll start needing to heal more often from this point forward, but by now you've been given so many off globals it'll be fairly easy to keep up like always. Level 72, Corruption Mastery II, Broil Mastery III, Biolysis, and Broil III. All obtained at the same time, Corruption Mastery II upgrades Bio II into Biolysis, and Broil Mastery III upgrades Broil II into Broil III, but also ups the Ruin II potency to 200. Biolysis is a huge boost to your dot, turning into a 60 potency dot for 30 seconds for a total of 600 potency. Broil 3 is a smaller boost, now doing 280 potency per hit. Otherwise, nothing else has changed. Level 74, Recitation. On a 90-second cooldown, this grants you a buff for 15 seconds, so you don't have to spend it immediately. Your next Adlo, Succor, Indom, or Excog is completely free. This applies to both mana and Aetherflow. You are also guaranteed a critical hit. I will go over using each skill individually. Combining with Adlo, one often great use is pre-pull Adlo. Recitation, Adlo, then start the fight. You won't have to heal the tank for a while, guaranteed, thanks to that 750 potency shield. Or maybe the fight starts with a tank buster. Here's the entire mitigation the tank will need. If it's not, combine it with an Excog right after. If the tank buster isn't until a little further in, say 40 seconds into the fight, you can save Recitation for an Adlo there, or guarantee a critical shield for Deployment Tactics. Recitation Adlo the tank so they can make use of the Catalyze on the boss, then deploy onto your team. In one final use, combine this with Emergency Tactics for a makeshift Benediction. 1050 potency critical heal on the tank immediately. You can even still combine this with Excog. Use that first, then the Recitation Adlo for huge amounts of healing all at once. A guaranteed crit Succor can be amazing for raid-wide damage, including harder hitting ones if Deployment Tactics is not available. Add in a Sacred Soil to reduce the damage even further, and be even safer. Or again, recover from heavy raid-wide damage with Emergency Tactics. A crit 405 potency heal is useful AoE healing, if not as good as our other options. But maybe it's your only option because Indom is on cooldown still. Speaking of Indom, this one is obvious. Team is super low on health and you need a burst of healing? Use Recitation Indom. This skips the needing to press Emergency Tactics for outright healing. It also saves you a GCD, so you can get an extra Broil out, or even more heals. Recitation Excog. This is similar to using it on Indom. You save a GCD that you could have used on Adlo, or maybe for a Succor because you want to heal the entire team too. Or, you're a greedy DPS like me. Smack that ground. Smack that ground. Slap it! Just remember the benefit of using it on Aetherflow skills. You do not spend an Aetherflow for using it as such. If nothing else, more Aetherflow means more Lustrates and Energy Drains. Level 76, Fey Blessing. On a 60-second cooldown, this orders your fairy to spend 10 fairy gauge and heal all allies within 20 yalms for 350 potency. This is our most efficient AoE heal. Fairy gauge is extremely easy to get. You basically get 30 every Aetherflow recast, which is also 60 seconds, just like Fey Blessing. If we use Fey Blessing off cooldown, we basically still gain 20 fairy gauge for every Aetherflow recast. Plus, the only other use we have for the gauge is Aetherpact, which is only 400 potency per 10 gauge. That is only 50 potency more on a singular target. The same rules all basically apply to any AoE heal. If the party needs AoE healing, Fey Blessing. It's very powerful. And much like all of our other skills, using Fey Blessing will cancel Aetherpact. Level 78, Enhanced Sacred Soil. You just got one more reason to rescue that one DPS who refuses to stand close to the boss. Sacred Soil has been given a hot of 100 potency. The mere act of placing the bubble down also gives a tick of 100 potency. In total, this can be 600 potency of healing. That's 150% of an Indom or a Lustrate on the entire party if they remain inside, on top of still negating 10% damage. Overall, this is a huge power boost to Sacred Soil. Try and keep everyone inside the bubble. Place it down in a nice spot. Level 80, Summon Seraph. On a 120-second cooldown, you will resummon your fairy as a super fairy for 22 seconds. When this timer runs out, she will immediately return to her base form. Whispering Dawn and Fey Illumination are the exact same, despite having Seraph versions. However, Embrace has changed for the better. It becomes Seraphic Veil. It restores 200 potency of HP and puts up a shield for that same amount for 30 seconds. This stacks with Galvanize. If the tank is being healed by this, it'll be amazingly powerful by comparison. It's mostly wasted if she heals someone else, but it can end up being useful if it happens. Her main draw, however, is the other skill you got. Level 80, Consolation. This is a skill with charges. The moment you spend a charge, the next one will begin to charge. The skill's charge time is merely a way to circumvent being able to spam this infinitely during Seraph's time on the field, and limit you to twice for her duration. Both charges will refill before Seraph comes back off cooldown, no matter what. As for the skill itself, Consolation is a 300 potency AoE heal that places a shield of the same power onto everyone hit, so 600 potency on all allies. These are good for both preventing damage and quickly healing up afterwards. Many bosses in the endgame can have powerful raid wides that hit everyone multiple times in a row, or can use their raid wide multiple times in a row. In a situation where a boss will AoE back to back, you can Consolation to negate the first, then Consolation after to restore any HP lost while re-shielding for the second one. As always, these can be combined with Succor, Deployment Tactics, and Sacred Soil. Some of the harder content gets on that level, especially Savage Raids. The mindset you can take with these skills at a high level can apply to lower level content. Holding onto your most powerful skills is just wasteful when you could be repeatedly using them. Within the duration of an instance, you can get off many uses of all of your skills. Being restrained to keep some stuff available for an emergency can be noble, but the skills can prevent the emergency to begin with when used well. Do your best to use your entire kit as best you can. Keep your allies alive, kill your enemies, and slap that ground! Thank you for watching my Scholar 30 to 80 skills guide. Feel free to give feedback or ask questions on what might still be confusing to you. My goal is to help players improve in whatever ways I can. Take care, and have fun in your adventures across Eorzea. May the power of an Nidhogg's lay waste to your enemies.